Hello all, welcome to the lecture. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss some very important topic related to your NCERT book, Class 12 Political Science. And we are taking up the book Contemporary World Politics. So we are going to know that for the common entrance test, what are the important topics in this particular book. So there are basically 9 chapters, and within 9 chapters, we will see that there are a lot of areas that are important. So while preparing, what should be kept in mind, right? So chapter wise we will see the subtopics and what is important while preparing the exam, that we are going to discuss up in today's lecture. So let us just start talking about chapter number 1. So chapter 1 talks about the Cold War era, and in this chapter, when I say Cold War era, so what we have to prepare is that we should know what is Cold War, right? So when I mean by Cold War, this Cold War refers to its US versus USSR war. We should know the emergence of the two power blocs. We have to study the Cuban Missile crisis in the arenas of the Cold War, right? So apart from that, when you're studying Cold War, there is one thing to remember is that Cold War is not limited to what just is there in the NCERT, but there are other things also. So we should know what was India's stand, right? India's stand during the Cold War. So any kind of policy, right? So I am talking here about NAM. What was NAM? What was this NAM? So relating it with the concept that what is Cold War, when I say Cold War, what is the meaning of Cold War? So Cold War referred to the competition, the tensions between the US and the USSR, the Soviet Union, right? So there are lots of topics that you have to cover. The Cuban Missile crisis. What was Cuban Missile crisis? So when you are studying about Cuban Missile crisis, the date is very important. Date is very significant. The location is something very important that you need to cover, right? So within chapter 1, it is important to, when you're preparing that Cuban Missile crisis, then I'm talking about 1962 period. Then what is Cold War? Who are the two power blocs that were engaged in Cold War? What were the arenas of the Cold War? Everything has to be covered pinpoint pin. Now, chapter 2 is related to the end of bipolarity. When I say end of bipolarity, the chapter covers India's relations with Russia. So when you are covering India's relation with Russia, we don't have to be just, stick ourselves to the history. If I talk about, right, any recent development that has happened between India and Russia, so we should know whether is there any particular thing that has taken place between the two countries, right? So if I talk about, you should be aware that Russia is the major defense partner for India, right? So, and in the current context of the growing tensions between Ukraine and Russia, we should know that what is India's stand. So Russia's military is divided into 3 services. We should know that the Russian ground forces, the Russian navy, and the Russian air force spaces. So being a major defense partner, what is technology? What are the major defense equipments, right? We have been taking from Russia. That is something very, very important. That what are the technologies that we have been taking from Russia? So if I talk about recently, like your BrahMos 2 missile, which country owns BrahMos 2 missile? So BrahMos has been developed as a joint venture between RDRDO of India and the NPOM of Russia. So what is BrahMos missile? That you should know. So these is something like the general topics also related to your current affairs also. Also talking about that America is not happy and it imposed certain sanctions. That India will be imposed with certain sanctions if it's not moving with what America wants India to do. So what are those sanctions related to, right? So with that, if you're studying about India and Russia, it's very important that you cover up the relations also. What is Soviet Union? When I say Soviet Union, which countries were part of your USSR, right? And which countries and how everything happened, that we should know. We need to know the democratic politics and capitalism is post-communist regime also. So whenever you're preparing a topic, so you should know that how it needs to be prepared, right? So just like I said, India's relation with Russia. So when I say India's relation with Russia, not just confining yourself to the history, but in the current context also. Chapter number 3 talks about US hegemony in world politics. So we are entering into a new scenario where again there are stiff tensions between the countries. So subtopics of this chapter are like your economic and ideological challenges to the US, beginning of the New World Order. So when you are studying beginning of the New World Order, you should know what is this New World Order. When I say 9/11, what is this 9/11 and the start of global war on terror? Invasion of Iraq and how invasion happened, rising constraints on American power. So now in the chapter number 2, we just covered up India and Russia, right? Now we have to cover up India and American relations also. So there are a lot of agreements recently that we have signed with the USA. So what are those particular agreements that we have been signing? Another very important thing that you should know about what is Quad. Quad is always have been in news for the past 2-3 years. It is a grouping of 4 countries. So America is one of them. There is India, there is Australia, and there is Japan, right? So you should know if there is any current grouping that we are part of it within history, that what were the relations between India and America. If I talk about strategic relationship, you should know about what are 2+2 dialogues. So these are something that you will find these particular terms in newspapers also, economic relations and how the investment has been going on. Under the Trump regime and under the regime of Joe Biden, there are a lot of changes. So from current affairs context also and the history point of view also, you have to cover the topic. Chapter number 4 talks about alternative center of power. So we will be covering developing relations between India and China. Now China is there, we have to cover it. And we already know that from the past 2-3 years, relations with China are not going smooth. So China's rise in economic power in the post-Mao era, very, very important. So generally, when you're studying about India and China, so it is said that China was somewhere not at par with India. But over the time period, once the period of 1970s started, a lot of development we could see in the service sector, in the manufacturing sector, and China's development took heights. There was a time when China was facing massive famines. There were a lot of debts. So what were the initiatives that were taken by China and what led India to be behind? So China's rise as an economic power in the post-Mao era and the creation of the European Union and your ASEAN. When I talk about ASEAN, what is this ASEAN? So from current context also, this is important. That ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Nations and it is a regional organization. What is the motto of ASEAN? So motto of ASEAN is one vision, one identity, one community. Which day is observed as ASEAN Day? 8 August. So everything is there within the chapter. We have to just let us know that where we can find more of knowledge. Then ASEAN Secretariat. Where is ASEAN Secretariat? Is it in Indonesia and Jakarta? Who are the member nations? So we need to cover up that who are the member nations, which was a recent country which has joined ASEAN. Chapter 5 talks about contemporary South Asia. When you're talking about contemporary South Asia, we talk about the democracy in Bangladesh. When you're covering Bangladesh, you should know about that Bangladesh was earlier part of Pakistan, right? And we should know about the war, the liberation war that occurred. A lot of things are to be covered when you're studying Bangladesh. Military and democracy in Pakistan, then conflict in Sri Lanka on the basis of ethnicity, the Tamilian issue, that is one particular issue. And recently Sri Lanka is going with a lot of economic crisis right now. What is that? What led to that? And conflicts and peace in South Asia. So when you are covering South Asia, there are not just Bangladesh, Pakistan and Sri Lanka in South Asia. There are a lot of other countries, right? So if I talk about which is not part of the chapter is Maldives. So Maldives is another very major significant country and we already know that Maldives is one country that we are very much engaged in the tourism sector. But there is one movement going in Maldives, that is India out. What is this India out movement, right? So there are certain things when you're covering up the concept like South Asia, Bangladesh, who is the current uh, Prime Minister. Then Sri Lanka. If I talk about Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka has been in news for quite a period of time. Okay, so what kind of system of government is there? If I talk about Sri Lanka's system of government, it is a semi-presidential system that is determined by the Sri Lankan constitution. So these particular small things you need to cover up within what is there in the chapter. Chapter 6, another very significant important topic, talks about your international organizations. And one international organization that is covered here is UN. So what is UN? How UN evolved? History of UN, the year of formation. Where was India part of UN when UN was being formed, right? So UN, when I am speaking about UN, United Nations, there are various other things. It is an international organization that was formed in 1945. So when you are covering UNs, you have to study about the history of UN, as well as another important thing is that you have to study about the organs also. When I say organs, in within UNs, there are 6 other organs, right? What are those organs that you have to cover? Like your General Assembly, Security Council, Economic and Social Council, Trusteeship Council, International Court of Justice, and UN Secretariat. So when you are covering this particular topic in a wholesome way, it is important that you cover the organs also. Then you have to cover a position of India in the structured UN. So within the UN, there is another important thing, that permanent members of UN. Who are these permanent members of the UN? So we call these countries as the P5 countries. Permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. So who are those countries? You should know about them. China is one, your France is one, your Russia, UK, and US. And why other countries are not permanent members? Why are there only 5 permanent members? 5 of the members are permanent and the rest of the 10 are temporary. So permanent members have the ability to veto resolutions of the Security Council, and the inclusion of new members in the appointment of the Secretary General of the UN. So it is considered that this is going to be why UN was formed, right? That we have to look after a lot of international problems that are cropping up. Then we will be covering rise of economic international organization. So this is something very important when you're covering international organization within this UN also. So what are the organs, the P5 members, and why not the other countries can become a permanent member of UN? So in a wholesome way, you have to cover up this particular topic. So is UN still relevant, or whether it is not relevant over the changing time period? So how the things have evolved and whether some reforms are required, so that you have to cover up. Chapter number 7 is security in the contemporary world. So in this you will talk about traditional security and cooperation. You will talk about security. When I say security, I just don't mean security on land. I mean security over air also. I mean security over oceans also. You should know, when I'm talking about oceans, we are as a country concerned about the Indo-Pacific region, the growing threats in the Indo-Pacific and how they can hamper as a country. There are various schemes. Sagarmala initiative. What is this Sagarmala initiative? That you should know. Okay, so definition of security. What is the definition of security? Human rights and migration. Migration is another very important issue that has been in news. So when you are covering political science, migration, one, you will be able to better relate it. Due to Ukraine-Russia war, a lot of Ukraine people, they migrated to different places. Your Rohingyas, who are these Rohingya population? So you should know about who are these Rohingyas. They were in news. Then human rights, another very important organization that is related to your human right is United Nations Human Rights Council. Where are the headquarters of this United Nations Human Rights Council? It is in Geneva, Switzerland. So you need to cover up some small things. If you talk about global poverty, what do I mean by global poverty, right? So global poverty, it is not a simple concept that you can understand within a definition. There are a lot of more things associated with it. That how do we define global poverty? How do we come to the conclusion that what causes global poverty? That how global poverty is related. In chapter 8, we cover up environmental and natural resources, in which we cover India and environmental issues. So we already know that we are a country, we are close to the equator, we are Tropic of Cancer passing through us, and we are already facing a lot of environmental issues. So if I talk about the rising forest fires or the melting glaciers, the flash floods, a lot of things have started coming up. So from that point of view, if there are any schemes, is there any news that is related to environment that you need to cover up? Struggle on traditional and common property resources, and then evolution of environmental norms. So what do you mean when I say by environmental norms? So there are a lot of movements around the state, within the state, out of the state. So environmental norms are basically rules which restrict environmentally harmful behavior or which prescribe ecologically friendly actions. There is another very important thing over here when you're talking about uh, environment. Greta Thunberg. Who is Greta Thunberg? She is a Swedish activist and environmentalist also, who is known for challenging the world leaders to take immediate action for climate change. So being a teenager, when she came forward with the environmental proposals, so a lot of things within the environmental sector also, right? That how we can cover up the global news. Then within this, you can also cover up that what is IPCC. So you should know that this is an intergovernmental panel on climate change. What is IPCC? And it is a body of the UN. Since we are covering US also, so within UNs you should cover up this particular portion, IPCC also, which is responsible for advancing knowledge on human induced climate change. In the chapter Globalization, we will be studying economic and cultural consequences of globalization, movement against globalization, and globalization in India. When I say globalization in India, that from the time period of 1990s, look at the country now. What kind of reforms were there? What kind of policy changes were there? Were there any policy changes? And were these policy changes successful in implementing and making the country what it is today? So globalization is also a very important topic. So effect of globalization in India, globalization in the Indian economy, advantages of globalization, where points are also important, that it will lead to increase in compensation, living standard of the people, impact of globalization. This is something very important. Impact of globalization that we have to cover up. Some are going to be in favor, some are going to be saying that no, we are against this particular topic. From both the perspective, you have to understand that what is. So simply when I say globalization means integrating the Indian economy with the world economy, and globalization is the outcome of your liberalization and your privatization, and aim to create a borderless world. So this is how I define when I speak about globalization. So these are the things that globalization, one thing also important is that globalization is not limited to this particular definition. We talk about cultural globalization, we talk about political globalization, technological, economic and financial. So what are these globalization? You should know about them.